This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome to Warren Community College's UAS 109 Crew Resource Management Overview. Crew Resource Management is often referred to by the acronym CRM. What is Crew Resource Management? A simple definition of CRM is that it is a process designed to aid in the prevention of aviation accidents and incidents by deliberately improving crew performance through a better understanding of the concept of understanding basic human factors. So in essence, and you will see CRM now used by other industries, the hospital industry has taken this uh, concept and used it effectively as well. So if you are looking for things on crew resource management on the internet or in a library, be sure to identify that you are looking for aviation related articles or interests. Not that the hospital ones won't provide you with interesting insight into human factors, it just may be more applicable to look under aviation. The concept of CRM, though, is really about how can we train our crew to understand how human beings behave, interact, make decisions, react to stressful situations, etc., in an effort that they understand their own human limitations so they can communicate more effectively with one another, make better decisions, with the overall goal obviously being the prevention of accidents and the increase of safety in aviation. It's really important to understand that crew member attitudes and behaviors do impact decision making. They do impact crew behavior. They do impact the interaction and communication. You would recognize this when we talk about attitudes impacting safety. If someone has a negative or a bad attitude and they refuse to communicate, or they always look at the downside of things, and I don't mean in a proactive way, like really looking at an aviation event and finding the mitigating factors. But in essence, what they're doing is they're not part of the community, or they're so negative in what they do that people will not uh, speak to them or work with them. And we need to know that both their attitudes or their behaviors are going to impact safety in a negative way. And that's part of what you need to kind of understand is that part of the training in crew resource management is the essential improvement of attitude and behavior. In crew resource management, the crew becomes the unit of training and education, not the person. So this is what you have to kind of think about. We often think about education and training of an individual, but when we talk about crew resource management, what we're trying to do is team build or create a group cohesion between a group where they interact. So they actually need to be trained together, the crew. So what are the goals of this course and CRM or in relation to CRM? Provide an opportunity for individuals to examine their respective behaviors, provide an opportunity for the individual to examine their behavior in the context of a crew, give the students an opportunity to understand teamwork and how to make it effective on a crew, and provide the individual student a chance to learn management, leadership, and training or educational techniques. These are the ultimate goals of the course. Crew resource management training works. Evidence shows that attitudes and behavior can be improved. This has been going on since about the 1970s in aviation, and the track record of increased aviation safety is one of the factors that um, researchers will point to and say, look, CRM is effective. Let's talk about this course and the topics we'll cover. Obviously, we're going to cover the history uh, and the concept of crew resource management or CRM. We're going to look at the principles and concepts. We're going to look at what does it take to build an effective team? What is it about our human sensory capabilities that we can use or learn to understand for aviation safety? Human information processing, human performance capacities or capabilities and limitations, principles of learning, fatigue and motivation, human errors, safety and performance improvements, workload management and situational awareness, conflict resolution and machine interface, risk management, review of ADM or aeronautical decision making, aviation CRM and small UAS operations, creating checklists for safe operations, and we are going to go over the FAA or the Federal Aviation Administration's fundamentals of instruction. CRM is another component of risk management, and we should remember this. It's really about how are we managing risk. We're managing risk by having a more effective crew. Most of CRM has research is done on manned aviation. Limited or recent articles are coming up on unmanned operations. So we're going to have to learn a lot of things about manned aviation and translate that or use that or embody that in our unmanned operation activities. CRM has evolved, like I said, since about 1970. Research demonstrates that 60 to 80% of all aviation accidents were happening in relation to human error, not machine error. So the human actions and reactions, not catastrophic system failures, were the leading cause of accidents. NASA found that these problems are associated with poor group decision-making, ineffective communication, inadequate leadership, and poor task and resource management. So the goal was, if it's not systems failures, if it's not machine error, if it's not, catastrophic failure caused by something outside of the people themselves, and 60 to 80% could be really traced back to the human behaviors or the human errors, then we needed to do something to diminish or limit those errors. So CRM will go well beyond the I Am Safe checklist, but certainly the I Am Safe checklist is part of it, but it's an individual. And you'll remember this from your Part 107 training. I am safe, illness being the I. Do I have any symptoms? Am I sick? Do I have anything that would diminish my capacity? Stress, or I am, so let's go to medication. M is the medication. Are you on any kind of prescription over-the-counter drugs that would affect your ability in aviation or in decision making? S, stress. Am I under psychological pressure from the job? Am I worried about financial matters, health problems, family, anything that's putting me under stress? Alcohol. Have you been drinking within 8 hours? And you remember 8 hours throttle to bottle, or bottle to throttle rather. Fatigue. Am I tired or not adequately rested? Or emotions, am I emotionally upset? So these will help the individual themselves find out if they're ready to be part of a crew, but crew resource manager will have to go beyond that. So we must go beyond just systems and individuals to understand others. So to understand people, we need to get beyond just the individual input. I am safe, I'm here, I'm ready to fly. But are you able to interact, communicate, other things with people? In manned aviation, the civilian airlines began CRM training centered on decision-making, think aeronautical decision-making, you're familiar with that, and communication techniques. Later, crew resource management expanded to include these personality issues, things like leadership, management, and team development. So over the past 25 years, the FAA designed a very comprehensive training programs focusing on 9 core concepts. So let's go over them. What are those 9 core concepts for manned aviation? Situational awareness, effective communication, mission planning, group dynamics, risk management, human factors, workload management, stress awareness, and decision making. Throughout this course, you should be looking to convert the lessons of manned aviation into our own unmanned aircraft system operations. So let's talk about the first and most important in many people's eyes, or most causality in accidents, a loss of situational awareness. So this is a focus of CRM training and will certainly be a focus of this course. Loss of situational awareness is the #1 cause reported among human failures. I lost my bearings. Lost my directional. I lost my capacity to understand where we were. And for those of us who have flown drones, it's easy to lose your situational awareness for a drone because you're looking at a tablet and you're looking up at the drone. So it can become quite simple to kind of even lose the direction, north, south, east, or west, where the uh, degrees, the heading that the drone is facing. So we need to be aware of that. So situational awareness is vitally important and can be understood from manned to unmanned aviation. So situational awareness, as a basic definition, is a continuous perception of the self and the aircraft in relation to the dynamic environment of flight, in relation to threats, in relation to the mission, and in relation to the ability to forecast and then execute tasks based on your sensory perception. So it's a loss of part of your sensory perception that is situational awareness. Another key factor in CRM training is effective communications. But remember, what is an effective communicator? Who is an effective communicator? And how do you train for this? At the college, people often ask me, or they say things like, well, there was a failure, there was a breakdown in communication. I'm always taken by this because I think about, if I was to hide $1 million inside one of the facilities and I was to say to everyone who worked there, I hid $1 million today. And if you work together and find it, you can each have $1 million. I can guarantee you all my communication problems will be solved without any training. But the world isn't like that. It isn't that simple. So we do need to train for communications, and we need to teach people how to relay information. And that communication is a shared responsibility. But remember, it is a subjective concept. You may feel like you're communicating very effectively. The receiver of that information may not. But another receiver on your crew may understand you completely. So we need to be aware of that. We need to kind of work through that training. Many people often feel it's not a problem, and probably I would be blamed for that if you take me back to my last statement. I don't think the problem is people's ability to communicate. I think the problem is people choose not to for attitude and behavioral reasons. But realize that a lot of people think, oh, we communicate very effectively when they do not. So we need to work on that. CRM training is dedicated to addressing the denial as an issue in and of itself. So we have to say, all right, it is an issue. We know it is. There's evidence, there's research that says it. So we have to work on it. So to instruct you on communication errors, inhibitors, and effective communication behaviors will be a major part of this course. Under flight crew communications, remember, one of the things we have to look at is, well, in order for them to communicate, they have to have some similar qualifications, or they have to have qualifications for the crew duties that they're assigned. So we need to have requirement for crew members in terms of qualifications. We just can't grab someone without any training of any kind and put them into a crew role. In order to have good communications, we have to have command and control mechanisms. So there has to be crew member designations and duty designations. It often helps to have a standard flight crew where everybody knows their role and responsibility. We have to work on verbal communication. How do we communicate verbally? And in aviation, that can be difficult because we may be far away from a person using radio communications. So not only might we need to learn how to communicate face to face, but we may have to learn how to communicate using technology as well. Remote pilot and command duties should be assigned and well understood, and visual observer duties should be assigned, well understood. And if you're using an air boss, or you're using a person manipulating the controls, or security, you would add them to the communication and well define the duties at the outset of any mission. We also have to look at group dynamics. Group dynamics cover many topics, but the focus on this course will largely be on leadership, conflict resolution, team building, and assertiveness. So we'll try to train for all these things. The most difficult, of course, will be the concept of assertiveness. Workload management. Workload management training helps set priorities and responsibilities while recognizing performance limitations. We will look at the causes of poor workload management. We will learn how to recognize excessive workloads, and we will learn how to respond to workload differentiation in that section of the course. We'll return to risk management. Almost every course we teach has some element of risk management in it, and this is no exception. Risk management is an orderly, progressive way of viewing a very complex situation. It helps in effective decision-making to know the risks in advance and to have worked through what they are and what the mitigations would be. And risk management only works when every crew member makes the right decision to manage risk in their planning, in the execution as they occur. So you'll remember in the Warren program, we often rely on the Jaros-Sura model for defining operational flight areas and for risk mitigations. This is no difference in what we're doing. So I just want you to be aware of that. So when we're doing risk, we have to look at ground risk, airspace risk, mission risk, and have contingencies and emergency procedures all along the way. That helps us mitigate risks. And the Jaros-Sura, as I said, we will review again, not in as great a detail as we do in our risk management course and our safety course, but in essence, it is how we operate. We also have to remember our 1-800-WX brief, where we can get our NOTAMs and TFRs, and we should also remember all the various weather forecasting. These are common risks, so those are the ones you want to think about first. At Warren, we do have a UAS professional pilot code of conduct, and it is make safety the top priority, number one. Seek excellence in personal airmanship and flight operations. Adopt sound principles of aeronautical decision-making and develop and exercise the practice of good judgment. Become a leader and strive to be a leader in all aviation operations. Take lessons from manned aviation and apply them to manned operations. Maintain situational awareness and adhere to prudent operating practices. Aspire always to be a professional. Act with responsibility, integrity, and courtesy, and adhere to all applicable laws, regulations, and industry guidance. Those are what we expect of our pilots and our student pilots at Warren. In risk management, we'll also talk about flight operations. So we'll have to go over pre-flight planning, pre-flight inspections, pre-flight weather forecasts, pre-flight assessments, required documents for flights, which would include required permissions and the safety management system, and our appropriate checklists. Our required documentation might include mission overviews, altitudes to be flown, frequencies that plan to be used, planned flight times, including reserve fuel requirements or reserve battery requirements, contingency procedures, emergency procedures, the pilot's name, the crew's name, and date and time. So these will be required for all flights at the college, and we expect our pilots in their professional behavior and risk mitigation to keep their documentation up to date. Without the required documentation, that's the first step in the line of a lackadaisical attitude that can lead to an accident or some kind of catastrophic failure. We also employ a number of emergency procedures. So we have emergency procedures for loss of the data link between the ground control system or the remote control and the aircraft. We have emergency procedures for the loss of GPS signal. We have emergency procedures for a loss of the autopilot software or the autonomous software or applications that we might be using. We have emergency procedures for the loss of engine power or propeller malfunction. We have emergency procedures for ground control system failures. And we have emergency procedures for the intrusion of other aircraft into the UAS mission airspace. One of the most interesting things I've seen over the last year is there was a lot of emphasis on getting away from airplanes, which every remote pilot should do. But we've seen in the field in a number of cases that single engine planes, not commercial airlines, seem to all of a sudden be interested in what is that thing flying around. So if we're using the EB, which is a little bit harder to land, it does become kind of almost a race to get out of the plane's way as the planes that are out sightseeing start saying, I wonder what, and I'm assuming they're thinking, what kind of bird is that? And they're flying directly towards the drone. So this has become an even more important kind of mechanism that we need to think about in terms of emergency procedures. And we'll discuss that in this course. We need to know how to take emergency actions if we're the remote pilot. So how do we maintain the aircraft control in the event of an emergency? How do we quickly and almost immediately analyze the situation and make a corrective action? How do we pre-plan how to land in various areas so we can land as soon as possible? And how do we initiate a flight termination procedure? So we'll talk about all that. Another concept we'll go over in this course is stress awareness and management. Stress is the body's response to different demands placed on it. So there's a number of stresses. There's physical stress, psychological stress, emotional stress, stages of stress, and effects of stress. And within this, we'll obviously be talking about acute and chronic fatigue as well. And yes, of course, we will go back to the means to identify stress, which is the I Am Safe checklist. So even though crew resource management goes beyond I Am Safe checklist, think of it as the foundational building block of an effective crew, an effective individual coupled with another effective individual. We'll have to talk a lot about human behavior. One of the things we have to talk about first is humans think. Okay, not everybody thinks well. Everybody thinks they think well, but with proper training, you can think appropriately to prevent an accident. You can realize your role. You can come to grips with the fact that not everybody can be in charge. There has to be a commander, and there has to be staff roles and responsibilities. And this isn't to say that everybody doesn't have a voice, because we want effective communication, but there has to be a very well-defined command procedure and decision-making kind of hierarchy in order for this to be effective. We also have to remember that humans act. Look, in the event of an emergency, let's think about manned aviation. You may not be the commander, but your life is, if you're on the plane, your life is at risk. So you may take an action that without proper training to say, no, I have to have trust in my commander. So that's all part of the human behavior too, this concept of trust and appreciation of the other. Humans have to fulfill their needs. So remember that humans have needs, and they will work often even against their own interests to fulfill some of their wants at times. So when people talk about needs, I always say, let's talk about wants and needs, because we want a lot more than we actually need. So we have to think about that as the human dynamic as well. And then we have to think of the myriad of external factors that affect the way people behave. Think of unmanned aviation. Think of something simple that could affect behavior that you may not even plan for. I could think of if the crew could be overwhelmed if a celebrity came on board. So, these kind of external, so we think about weather, we think about, is there a TFR, is there a NOTAM? Think about things that could happen just in the environment around you. At Warren, I laughingly say one of the mitigating factors we always have to think about when we're flying at the college is we have black bear. That's not a normal thing to worry about, but if you're on the ground and a bear comes out and you're flying a drone, that is something we have to consider and have a mitigation for. Another thing we'll talk about is instructing your crew to improve mission planning and decision making. Look, CRM is not a natural act. This is something you have to train for. You have to be able to train another crew. So we not only want you in this course to learn crew resource management so you can be a member of a crew, but we want to teach you how to instruct and communicate, how to improve your missions, how to make decisions, but also how to teach others. And teaching in this regard is a lot of leadership. So Ross Perot once said, management is about the material things. It's about the supplies, the inventory, the equipment. People have to be led. People can't be managed. You manage things, you lead people. That's what we're going to talk about here. Once we've talked about crew resource management, let's understand that management in a sense, but in sense of leadership. So as part of this course, we will prepare you for the FAA Fundamentals of Instruction exam, which is another exam you can take if you wanted to instruct others in aviation. So one of the best ways to become a leader and to prepare a crew is to become a teacher yourself. So that is one of the things we're going to go over in this course. So because to lead people, you may need to communicate effectively, and you may in fact need to teach them. So you may need a better understanding of the teaching and learning process that human behavior goes through, human behaviors themselves that affect their ability to accept information, factors that impact learning. We're going to talk about numerous methods of instruction or training, which you can read as communication. And most importantly, at the end, how do we evaluate human performance? So we're going to go through all those. Performance evaluation is a major factor as well, because if you have a crew and you want it to improve, you're going to have to appraise their abilities, appraise their performance, and give them a constructive evaluation of it. So we're going to talk about evaluation. How do you make it positive and proactive rather than just pointing out or criticizing, which often leads people to diminish their capacity? We want to empower people. So we're going to talk about that. How do we effectively evaluate? How do we change people through evaluation and through education? How do we create performance enhancement so in conjunction with mistake avoidance? And you've all heard me say this before who've been in any of my courses: professionalism, professionalism, professionalism. If any industry needs professionalism, it's unmanned aircraft systems. I want to give you a couple of other thoughts outside of a review of the syllabus or the review of the course that I just did to guide you in your learning. One, let's remember one of the other important things in crew resource management with UAS is to maintain privacy in all operations. Take precautions, plan precautions with your crew not to film, image, or encroach on the personal space of individuals when they have a reasonable expectation of privacy. When you're taking video, most of our payloads will be video for imaging operations on private land. Get a written email consent from the landowner and all persons present on the property. When we're doing photographic imaging or video imaging operations on public lands, post signage indicating that aerial photography or imaging is taking place. When reasonable, obtain written consent from all persons present. And remember, there may be public lands where flying a UAS is illegal. Check your state and local guidelines for that. Remember also that we like to practice what we call the sterile cockpit concept. The so-called sterile cockpit rule states that flight crew members shall not engage in any activity during a critical phase of the flight that may distract from or interfere with the duties necessary for safe operation of an airplane, but in our case, of a UAS. We want people, if they come up to you, to realize they've now basically invaded a cockpit of aviation. Now, I know a lot of times people say, oh, UAS, it's a flying toy, it's a flying computer, it's a flying camera. It's not that big a deal. You are flying an aircraft that could come to the ground and hurt a person, hit a car on the ground, cause a major accident, hit an airplane in the sky, catastrophically fall in free flight, and there could be a person. There's so many things that can go wrong in unmanned operations that you have to think of when you're holding that remote control as if you're in the cockpit, and you need to avoid distraction. Remember also that the critical phases of flight, and especially unmanned flight, are usually takeoff and landing. And although the rule typically applies to manned general aviation, single pilot operations, and flight training, it's also valid for the operation of unmanned aircraft systems, even though you're not, as I said, physically in the cockpit. But takeoff and landing for UAS, like manned aircraft, is where most things can go wrong. And remember, as you go through this course, you will read a number of things about manned aviation. What you have to do is conceptually then reconsider the concepts, the lessons learned, and how would we apply them to unmanned aircraft systems. When we can do that, we will have effectively learned how to be an effective crew member, and then we can communicate and change what has been learned from manned aviation, put it in place for unmanned systems or unmanned aircraft, and we can avoid some of the problems that happened in manned aviation before crew resource management was initiated. So that's why I say, remember UAS, because at the end of the day, you are applying everything you're learning in this course to unmanned aircraft system operations. I'm Dr. Will Austin for Warren Community College. Thank you and have a wonderful, wonderful experience in our course on crew resource management.